Focal Point AFR Talk, 888-589-8840. If you want to share with us some milestones from your walk with God, what your pile of rocks is, your pile of stones, your stone monument to God's faithfulness, His power, goodness, guidance in your life. You know, yesterday I brought you that story about how all of these foods that used to be demonized, vilified, you know, and remember, Michelle Obama created a hostile work environment for a gay pastry chef. She drove a gay pastry chef out of the White House because she created such a hostile work environment for a homosexual who worked for her. The guy was married, and she drove him right out of the White House. He finally quit because she was demonizing butter, demonizing eggs, demonizing cream, all the stuff that makes sugar, demonizing sugar, all the stuff that makes stuff taste good. So he finally had it, such a hostile work environment, he finally quit. So there's Michelle Obama, the paragon of tolerance and gay agenda, creating such a hostile work environment for homosexual, he had to quit. Now, but we brought you that story about how all these foods that once were verboten, I mean, it's red meat, it's eggs, it's potatoes, it's coffee make you smart, how those things are all now back on the good list. And my point is, if you listen to the left, their mantra is very easy to figure out. It is this: there is something wrong with everything. That's why at some point you just tune all that out. You forget about all that because they don't know what they're talking about. What's out today may be in tomorrow. I give you another example. This is from AmericanThinker.com. One constant on the whole dietary thing has been the advice to avoid saturated fats. Saturated fats have been demonized now for decades. Here's a piece from Anahad O'Connor in the New York Times. It's not coming from some, not coming from WorldNet Daily or Alex Jones on InfoWars. This is from the New York Times. A large and exhaustive new analysis by a team of international scientists found no evidence. I repeat, no evidence, as in zada, as in zip, nada, zilch, no evidence that eating saturated fat increased heart attacks and other cardiac events. The new findings are part of a growing body of research that has challenged the accepted wisdom that saturated fat is inherently bad for you and will continue the debate about what foods are best to eat. New research published on Monday in the journal Annals of Internal Medicine, can't get any tonier than that from a medical standpoint, did not find that people who ate higher levels of saturated fat had more heart disease than those who ate less, nor did it find less disease in those eating higher amounts of unsaturated fat, including monounsaturated fat like olive oil or polyunsaturated fat like corn. So in other words, eating unsaturated fat doesn't do you any good, and eating saturated fat doesn't do you any harm. So it's just a matter of common sense and all that. So we go back to Uncle Brian's diet tips. Eat when you're hungry, quit when you're full, eat whatever you want. Down in Florida, that special election in Florida District 13, it turns out, you know what the key motivator to get people out to vote was? The name of Nancy Pelosi. This is from Newsmax.com. Republican strategists involved with Republican David Jolly's win in the Florida congressional race are crediting a sophisticated voter database nicknamed Honey Badger and voter concern about Democratic Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. Honey Badger updates constantly and integrates real-time data with existing files, allowing strategists with the National Republican Congressional Committee to track which voters they had to target and what messages would motivate them to vote. That's according to the National Journal. The system indicated in late February that absentee ballots showed David Jolly was trailing Democratic contender Alex Sink by 6 points, but leading her by 12 to 14 points among those who had not cast absentee votes, hadn't yet voted. So how do you get these people to turn out? Jolly's campaign was running out of time to make up the difference, so the strategists targeted using the database system to target the voters who were most likely to turn out and vote. Okay, so you pick the people most likely to show up and vote. How do you get them to get out of their houses and go to the polls? Their message across digital platforms and email was simple: vote now for Jolly or watch Pelosi, a California Democrat, take a step toward becoming House Speaker again. So they spooked these people into voting by invoking the name of Nancy Pelosi. Once we switched to that script across the board, that's when the surge started. That was late February. So it wasn't only people voting against Obamacare. It wasn't only people voting against amnesty. It was also people voting against Nancy Pelosi. Now, one last story, then we'll go back to the phones, 888-589-8840. I've often said that we should stop the building of mosques. Now, constitutionally, the issue of religious expression is left entirely up to the states. So if we're operating with the Constitution that the founders gave to us, again, not the one that is mangled and been shredded beyond recognition by the courts, the Constitution is drafted by the founders. The states have the right to regulate religious expression any way they want to. They can have an established church if they don't, or they cannot. They could also prohibit the building of mosques. States can do that and be within the parameters of the Constitution. Here's why that would be a good idea. Story from Free Beacon. The National Guard reservist arrested this week for planning to blow up the Los Angeles subway attended a radical, listen to this, California-based mosque that has been home to known terrorists and other extremist Muslims deported from the United States for their ties to terror. The FBI on Monday charged Nicholas Toussaint, a 20-year-old National Guard reservist. This guy's in our military, with attempting an attack on the LA subway system. Toussaint was known to have attended a terror-tied mosque in Lodi, a small town east of San Francisco. The Lodi Mosque has frequently found itself at the center of FBI terrorism investigations, and its former imam was arrested and deported for urging his congregation to kill Americans in the wake of September 11. Well, why don't you shut the whole thing down? If this is a place where they tolerate that kind of message, people ought to go out and kill the infidel Americans, why don't you shut the whole thing down? An Instagram account believed to be Toussaint's features several images of the mosque. Terror mastermind Ayman al-Zawahiri, a close friend of Osama bin Laden and current leader of al-Qaeda, attended the mosque prior to 9/11. Every time I would go to the mosque, al-Zawahiri would be coming or going, said an FBI informant. He was in this mosque all the time. The Lodi Mosque's former imam, Shabir Ahmed, was arrested in 2005 and accused of urging his followers to back bin Laden and kill Americans. Ahmed was also accused by the Justice Department of having links to a terrorist group in Pakistan. Ahmed eventually admitted to, quote, criticizing America. His case was used as an early example of how radical individuals slip through the State Department's visa system. He was ultimately deported back to Pakistan as a result of his ties. The terrorism probe was also widened to include other individuals in the community who admitted to having attended a jihadist training camp in Pakistan for approximately 6 months. Hamid Hayat, a suspect at the time who is now serving a federal prison sentence, reportedly told investigators that he and others were being trained on how to kill Americans. So you think about this. You have an American converts to Islam, goes to a radical mosque, then goes over to Syria to participate in jihad. What are they doing there? They're teaching him how he's got an American passport. They're teaching him how to come back to America and kill Americans. And I've talked about this before. We have evidence now that 81% of all the mosques in America either distribute literature or host speakers that advocate violence in the name of Islam, because these are the most popular mosques. 95% of all of the Muslims in America that go to mosque on a weekly basis, 95% of them go to a mosque that either through literature or guest speakers advocates violence in the name of Allah. That's why I say no more mosques. All right, let's go to the phones very quickly. Let's go to Johanna in Rockwell, Texas. Johanna, thanks for calling. Thanks for waiting. What's on your mind? Johanna, are you with me?
Yes, Brian.
Yes.
Thank you, and
yes.
Bless you for all you're doing.
Well, thank you.
My rock building moment was in my early 30s. I was very unhappily single, and with a bit of an ungrateful attitude, I told God I guessed he was all that I had. And instead of giving me a well-deserved head slap, he lovingly replied, yes, and I am all that you need.
Huh.
In that same moment, he flooded my being, my soul, with his peace, his love, his security, his overflowing joy. It changed me forever. I was perfectly content from that time on, knowing I was serving a God who was more than enough, that no matter what trials I would face in the future, He was my source, the I am God, and He has proved Himself faithful through facing challenges such as a house fire, breast cancer, and even the recent loss of our twin grandsons.
Wow.
I do not fear widowhood. I'm happily married, but I don't fear being a widow, as I know my God will never leave or forsake me, and He will always be enough.
Great, Joanna. That's a terrific story. Thank you for sharing that with us. You know, basically, Joanna's saying God was all she had. Turns out God was all she needed. One last call before we're done. Let's go to Robert, Lafayette, Indiana. Robert, only got about 45 seconds. Get right to it. Let us know what's on your mind.
Okay, I was adopted. God provided a way for me to be adopted by a woman who wasn't accepting children at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I was put in a solid Christian home, and I converted to Christ.
Wow.
Later in my life, I became depressed. I was dependent on medicine to keep me happy, and God, I prayed, and through His power, I am no longer dependent on those drugs.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
And as a side note, I'm glad Nancy Pelosi wasn't around during the first councils, because she would say we need to pass these doctrines to find out what's in them.
That's right. Yeah. All right, Robert. Appreciate that. Thank you. Appreciate that very, very much. All right, well, that's it for today. Seems appropriate to sum up with this blessing from Romans chapter 15. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in Him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Ladies and gentlemen, do not forget to bow low before God, stand tall before man, stand in the gap, and never forget, as our testimonies today have proved, we are fighting with God's help a winnable war. See you tomorrow.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.